So could you please introduce yourself?
I'm Sinclair. I'm the chair and the head of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada.
And this has been going on for a while now, a few years. And there's been gatherings in different cities. What has it been like hearing all these stories of what people went through?
The Commission is, this is our 5th of 7 national events here in Quebec City, or in Montreal rather, in the province of Quebec. But we've also held community events in a number of other communities, and altogether as commissioners we've probably visited over 500 communities in this country to talk with people about Indian residential schools and the story of residential schools. In listening to the stories of survivors, we can see that there's a significant sense of importance on the part of survivors to be able to relate their stories, to ensure that somebody is listening, and listening in a respectful way, and ensuring that their stories are recorded for posterity, for the future generations to be able to utilize whenever they need to understand what went on in residential schools. And also, we find that there's a considerable interest on the part of the general public to understand as well what went on, and to understand what the implications of residential schools are for the relationship that exists between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in this country. And that understanding, we think, is contributing to a better dialogue between those populations.
Yeah. So is that what you'd say the Commission is accomplishing?
The Commission is accomplishing a number of significant factors, but the name of the Commission tells the public and reminds us as commissioners what it is that we're here to do. We are here to identify those facts of history that establish the truth of residential schools in this country. Our first obligation as a Commission is to write a report which shows the full and complete history of residential schools, how they were established, why they were established, how they were run, why things happened in the schools that we've heard about, and what the implications of those events are on the lives of those who went to the schools, and also those who worked in the schools, because we must never forget that the population of people who were confined to the schools included the people who worked there. But the other part of our mandate and our obligation is to engage in a process by which we can assist those who went to the schools and the communities that they come from to engage in a process of reconciliation with the rest of the country, particularly those who are in positions of leadership in those institutions that are responsible for what happened, that is the government and the churches. So reconciliation, first and foremost, is between the two communities, the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal communities, but also we have found that reconciliation is also important within the Aboriginal community, because the greatest impact of the schools, the greatest negative impact of the schools, was upon the lives of those who went there as students. And that negativity was impacted also on the lives of their children and their grandchildren. So the intergenerational survivors are an important part of the discussion when we talk about the legacy of residential schools. But the intergenerational survivor population is also an important focus for us, because they're the ones who are going to be left with the obligation to continue the dialogue and reconciliation into the future.
So how would you say it's been received, all traveling across the country, hearing all these stories?
Initially, when the Truth and Reconciliation was first established, there was a stumbling start to it. The first set of commissioners quit, and so that had an impact upon the credibility of the Commission. And it had an impact, I think, upon the attitude of the survivors about whether or not the Commission was really going to be able to accomplish what it had been asked to do. And so there was a period of time in which we, as the new commissioners, appointed in 2009, had to reestablish the Commission's credibility, had to show our bona fides, as it were. And so we spent a considerable part of the first year doing that. We think we got the Commission back onto a good footing with the survivor population. But there's still some out there who, I think, just on principle, don't believe that a process which engages the government and the churches as parties to the dialogue is a process in which they want to be involved. And so we understand that, we accept that, But we think for the survivor population, those who went to the schools, this process that we've been asked to undertake is an important one.
And what do you think will come out of this? Like, what future steps will need to be taken, or what recommendations are you hearing that people see a need for?
The future will be the only judge of the success of what we accomplished. We hope that we will be able to do that full and complete report. In order to be able to do that, we have to ensure that we engage with the survivors in a credible enough level to show a full story of what went on in the schools. And that means that we need survivors to be talking to us. And we need their stories, we need their experiences, we need to be able to put those on the record. And in addition to that, we need to get to the documents. The churches and the government of Canada have millions of documents that they are obligated to make available to us at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And there's been some difficulty in the process of gathering those documents. We hope that we've been able to iron them out now, and that we'll be able to get those documents. Once we've had a chance to look at them and analyze them and utilize whatever of them we wish to for our final report, we also have an obligation then to archive those documents into a national research center for future generations, which means that we're not expected to talk about each and every document in our report, but we are expected at least to ensure that they are protected for the future generations. And that means that one of our obligations is to contribute to the creation of a national memory in this country about residential schools, so that people in future, in 50 or 100 years from now, will never be able to say they don't know what happened, or they never could know what happened, because those documents will be available for them to see.
And what do you think it means for the country as a whole to have the residential schools legacy as part of the history of the country?
We've always said as commissioners that this is not an Aboriginal problem. Residential schools did not only impact the Aboriginal people of this country, but the residential schools have created a Canadian problem. And that means as well that non-Aboriginal children who've been educated in this country have been educated largely in the same way about Aboriginal people as the Aboriginal kids in the schools were taught. That is, that Aboriginal cultures were irrelevant, Aboriginal languages were not worthy of protection, Aboriginal history was meaningless and irrelevant, and that Aboriginal people were nothing but savages, uncivilized pagans. And that attitude towards Aboriginal people has permeated the teaching and the education of non-Aboriginal people in this country for many generations. And it has contributed to not only misunderstanding, but outright racism in this country towards the Aboriginal population, and a willingness to deflect any responsibility for changing the way things are, because people have been taught to believe that what they believe, that what they have been told is the correct view of things, when in reality that's not the case. So our first recommendation right from the outset of the Commission's interim report was to undertake a process of ensuring that curriculums in this country, the public schools, teach children properly about who the Aboriginal people are, who they were, what they have contributed to the history of this country in a positive way, and how they have been victimized in a negative way by this country as well. And then in doing that, we can help Canada as a whole overcome its own national shame, because this is a part of history that Canada cannot be proud of. But Canada can take great pride as a country if they do something properly about this.
Now, I think I heard you use the word genocide in terms of describing what the residential schools were. Is that true?
Well, genocide has been defined in the United Nations Convention on Genocide in many ways, but one of the definitions of genocide includes the forcible removal of children from one racial population to be assimilated forcibly against their will into another racial population. So the forcible annihilation through removal of children of one race in favor of another race is an act of genocide. And I've pointed that out to the Canadian population, that the International Convention on Genocide includes a definition that exactly describes what went on in residential schools and why residential schools were created. In their own documentation relating to these schools, the Government of Canada has admitted that the purpose of residential schools was to kill the Indian in the child. And in the American boarding school system, the American Indian boarding school system, they admitted that the purpose was to kill the Indian, save the man. So very similar doctrines were applied in both cases. They would have been captured by the International Genocide Convention and have become the law of Canada if Canada had implemented the genocide in full. Canada has not done that. And what that means, of course, is that officials within Canada cannot be prosecuted for what's occurred. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't qualify as an act of genocide. And that's generally the comments that we have made. But people have sometimes misinterpreted it to mean that therefore they have not committed genocide, and that's not quite accurate. But they can't be prosecuted for it. But the Convention on Genocide clearly includes the residential school phenomenon, as it does in other countries as well, which have done the same things.
Oh, thank you. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Well, the important thing that I do want people to understand is that this is not an Aboriginal problem. This is not just for Aboriginal people to address. The issue of the impact of residential schools upon this nation is an issue that the nation as a whole needs to address. And then, as a country, as a future nation of this world, we will be in a better situation when Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people have full mutual respect for each other. And that's what reconciliation is all about.
Thank you.
Thank you.